Eugene, Springfield, Lane County, Oregon. Support our work. Make a donation at strpod.com. Thank you for listening to Spent the Rent podcast. And now, here's your host, Patty Rose.
Hello, I am Patty Rose. Welcome to the Spent the Rent podcast. My guest today is a dear friend, Kaz Zaidi. Kaz, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Kaz is a former U of O graduate student. You got your master's, is it in political science?
Yeah.
Okay. And now you're working in Salem as you're lobbying for housing and development. Tell me a little bit about that. What is it like? What does that mean to be a lobbyist in Salem? I know lobbyist has such a negative word, but there's people that are lobbying for the rights of the underrepresented, as well as for billionaires. So talk about what your kind of work you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So the core of it is trying to influence the decisions that legislators are making in Salem. And I'm primarily working in housing and economic development. So, an organization will bring me on because I've got subject matter expertise in getting bills passed, or sometimes in trying to make sure that if there's something problematic in a bill, that gets amended out. But really, it's about bringing together people who are on the outside of the political process with the people who are making the decisions, being that go-between, and then helping my clients get the things they want, which is primarily making sure that more housing gets built, making sure that small businesses, especially micro businesses, are getting support from the state. We know that the big businesses get a lot of support; they get a lot of tax breaks. So also trying to make sure that folks who are maybe 4 or 5 people working out of a garage somewhere, that they're getting some of that help as well, particularly in the form of things like technical assistance, so like filing the taxes, or I don't know, if you're exporting overseas, there's a bunch of regulations that you need to adhere to, so making sure you know about all of those things. And some of that will be funding coming out of the state, some of it will be policy things. So yeah, I spend a lot of time during legislative session in the building in Salem, meeting with a lot of politicians, trying to wrangle bills and get it so that enough people are willing to vote for them.
Yeah, and I mean that's why I wanted to have you on, because a lot of my guests are super uber local. I mean, we focus on Lane County. Even when you go to Salem, it gets lost on a lot of the people, myself included, where I don't know a lot of what goes on. I wanted to thank you for sharing that, because the word lobbyist has such a negative connotation, and I know that it's so important to have people advocating for you. That's really what I mean. The word advocate is looked at as being a really positive thing. So it's really a different. It's the same thing.
It's the same thing. I think the tendency is to use the word lobbyist to talk specifically about corporate lobbyists.
Right.
But yeah, there are people lobbying for all kinds of things. A union will have a lobbyist,
right?
Arguing for better pay rises, better conditions for their members. A lot of refugee rights organizations will need lobbyists,
right?
So yeah, it's definitely a term that's picked up a bad rap, and kind of deservedly so.
Sure.
For some of the people that do the work. But as with any job, with most jobs, it's morally neutral in and of what you're actually doing. It's just a question of who you choose to work for and what you choose to advocate for.
Do you know where the term lobbyist came from?
I do, yeah.
So, okay, tell the story, and I'll tell the story.
All right, so the story that I know is that it was literally people would hang out in the lobby, in Parliament and in DC.
Yeah.
So when laws were being passed, they would come out and they would bug the legislators and be like, make sure my thing gets done.
That's funny, because that's similar. But the story that I was told, and it was on a tour, like one of those bus tours in DC, and I bet that it started in England. It's the irony. But the story that I was told on a tour bus was that it was President Grant, like Ulysses S. Grant, that hated hanging out at the White House. And he wasn't like a political guy. He was just he was a general, And so he went to this oyster bar in Washington, D.C., and then people that would try to find favor with him would have to get past the gatekeepers, and the people that couldn't get past the gatekeepers were the lobbyists.
Yeah.
They're like hang out in the lobby. So that's, I don't know. So there's, who knows what the full, but yeah, I mean, essentially it's like the people that couldn't get past the gatekeepers a lot of times are the lobbyists. Well, anyway, so let's move on. What does an average day look like? I mean, you kind of mentioned it, but just talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing you do is you wake up in the morning, you check OLIS, which is the Oregon Legislative Information System. I think one of the things that Oregonians don't realize they're really lucky to have is that system. It's really comprehensive and it's really transparent. That's not the case in every legislature across the country. You can look up any bill, see when it's scheduled, see who voted for it, all of that critical information that you need to be able to do your job as a lobbyist. So you always check to see if something's been scheduled. Like legislative session moves really fast.
Yeah.
And so you might go to bed one day and everything's fine. Wake up the next morning to find a bill that's really bad for the people you're working for that's been scheduled for a hearing, and that afternoon sometimes.
Wow. So
especially towards the end of session, where things move really, really fast. And so you have to you're making phone calls, making sure that legislators know what your client and people who work with your client feel about a given bill. You might have a letter of support that you need to get ready in less than 24 hours.
Wow.
Make sure that people who can have an impact are texting the legislator, especially people in their constituency, to say, hey, that's a really important bill, you've got to sign up for it, or this is a terrible idea, it's going to screw your people over, and make sure you vote against it.
Right. So now this is the third. Actually, before we move on, I was going to talk about this later, but we'll do it now. You started working in Salem when Kate Brown was still the governor, correct? Have you noticed a shift in just the decorum in Salem and the way things are being done, or what's different about a Tina Kotek administration?
So I think Tina Kotek is really a details person. So she kind of she's very wonky. She gets down into the details of specific policy delivery. So I think there's a lot more of a hands-on approach from the governor's office. And that's got good sides and bad sides. The good side is the stuff that she cares about, she's really, really good at making sure that it happens. But every human being has their limitations. So I think what you're seeing is outside of those areas, it's more difficult for her to get stuff done because she doesn't have that. She can't focus on everything, right? Kate Brown, I think, used to give a lot more leeway to both her advisors and then also agency directors. And so I'd say that's the main difference. I'd also say that Kotek was speaker for 15 years, or however long it was, and was very, very strong in that role. Agree or disagree with her actual policy choices. And so I think that her stepping back from that role, the Democrats have been through. They're now on their second speaker since then. So I think they're just still trying to find their feet in the legislature in the post-Kotek era. And in some ways, that's the biggest.
Post-Brown.
The post-Kotek in as speaker.
I got you.
So I think in some ways, to me at least, the biggest difference of her being governor is that she's not speaker anymore.
I get you. I see what you're saying. Yeah. Wow. Do you see more work being done on a bipartisan level, or is that just not happening at Salem?
I mean, it has to happen to some extent. So even though the Democrats have supermajorities, they still need 3/5 to be able to raise taxes, for example. One of the things we saw this session was the transportation package not going through. And we're going to have a special session at the end of August to try and nail that. But one of the key sticking points was basically we need to pay for ODOT somehow. And about the only way to do that is by raising revenues or fees or taxes. And so there are people on both sides of the aisle for very different reasons who don't want to see that happen.
Sure.
And so you need to have some kind of bipartisan engagement. Otherwise, that work doesn't get done. And if you're, the holdout vote on a $11 billion package, you're not necessarily negotiating for stuff that's in that package, right? You might be like, I need to get this for my district if you want me to vote for something that's going to damage me politically because it's going to raise taxes on my constituents.
I mean, we saw that in Eugene, where there was a city councilor that was removed from office because of transportation, because of the bus, and because people were so against the EMX going out to River Road that I mean, I've learned from doing the show, talking to people like Sean Van Gordon and the Main Street Safety Project that got shot down in Springfield, that it takes better marketing. It takes better approach from our leaders to explain and educate to the voters that this needs to happen. Some of these things need to happen. I'm a big proponent or supporter of public transportation now, so I see it in a different way. Okay, so now this is the third time that I've had you on. We've talked about Brexit and populism. Those are the two main conversation pieces. So let's talk a minute and touch on each area and see what's changed since the last time. Starting with Brexit, which was in 2020, is that correct?
The vote was taken in 2014, and actual Brexit happened in 2016.
2016. Okay, so when England, God, I've been doing this for a while. When England left the European Union, you were vocally against it. You're originally from London, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so tell me in a brief, just for the audience that's listening, what Brexit was and what it has done. And you're still, I'm sure, very against it, but how has it played out?
So Brexit was the decision to leave the European Union, and basically it was driven by a couple of things, which is regulation and migration. And so people in the UK, post the financial crash in particular, though there were a lot of people going back to the 70s and 80s when the UK first started to see mass migration, that just didn't like the idea of having people who weren't the same as them in their country. That's the same everywhere in the world.
Unfortunately.
In the UK, it was simultaneously driving economic growth, but also like creating social friction. And that, alongside the regulation, so the EU has a lot of regulations that are equivalent to federal regulations, and nobody likes a federal regulation, right? So the idea was there were out-of-touch bureaucrats who were, regulating how much curve should be on your banana. That was one of the famous lies. It wasn't true,
Sure.
But one of the famous lies that was told. And then alongside that, within the European Union, there's freedom of migratory movement. So what you saw is people, especially from Eastern Europe, moving to the United Kingdom because there was more economic opportunity there. And this was unpopular with a group of people that are roughly analogous to MAGA in the United States. So there was a vote. People decided to leave the European Union. There was a referendum. And then a couple of years later, they went through all of the actual processes of it. And it's been an unmitigated disaster. So Britain's economy has grown more slowly than the European Union has. The fundamental issue, which is the need for cheaper labor, hasn't been solved. So when a bunch of Poles and Hungarians and Spanish and French or whoever else left the country because they had to, they were replaced by migrants from former British colonies, particularly South Asia and Africa. And so the fundamental issue that they had, which is we don't like people that don't look like us or talk like us coming into the country, isn't solved,
right?
Because the thing that those people bring is cheap labor.
Yeah, and they're like, these Polish people keep coming here, and now they're black.
Yeah. I mean, pretty much.
But
in a lot of ways, if you're looking at the world with that racist mindset, you make things worse for yourself.
Right.
So it has not been a success, and more than that, the fact that it didn't succeed has led to increasing xenophobia and nativism, because it's like, okay, well, we were told this thing was going to fix everything, and now it hasn't. So we need to look at other root causes of the problem. And in the UK now, we're seeing a lot of political fragmentation.
Yeah.
So there is a Labour government in charge at the moment, but that Labour government is the most right-wing Labour government, arguably, in the Labour Party's history.
Wow.
Very, very recently, just in the last week or so, we've seen Jeremy Corbyn, who those who follow UK politics might have seen at one point was the leader of the Labour Party on a social democratic platform. He has broken away with a few other MPs and formed his own left-wing party because there's a strong feeling on the left and indeed increasingly the centre in the UK that the current Labour government does not represent those people's views. At the same time, the Reform Party, led by Nigel Farage, who was the key architect of Brexit, is also gaining a lot of popularity. And that is your standard right-wing populist, like deregulate and stop migrants from coming in kind of platform.
Yeah, which is exactly what we have here, and that's why I wanted you to touch on this. These two topics that we've discussed, there's a thread. You can notice a trend that Brexit was really just a chance for the audiences here, for me and Eugene, to understand what the heck that was back then. And you, even though you've lived in America, in the U.S. for 15 years now, right?
It's like 10 years.
10 years, okay. And your wife is from Crestwell, so you have a connection to Oregon. And then populism, we talked about that, and like Orban from Turkey, is that correct? And then like Geert Wilders from the Netherlands, and all these different populist candidates that are far right, authoritarian, anti-democracy. It's scary because we're seeing that take hand in America. And so that's why I wanted to touch on this. People are like, what does Brexit have to do with Eugene? Well, I mean, we can see what's happening there is what we're going to see happen here, because there's this it's a different scenario. Would you say that that's true?
Yeah, I think the two things are very similar.
Yeah.
So I think the election and the re-election of Donald Trump is the same basic mechanism as Brexit.
Absolutely.
Specifically, it is people rejecting a status quo. And in both cases, primarily, most of the people doing the voting are white and working class people rejecting the status quo that isn't working for them, but then choosing something that is actually part of the problem as the solution. Because the sell that you get from right-wing populism is you can hold on to the few things that you do have, especially your sense of privilege or citizenship or belonging. And also, you will get the material benefits of having a more social democratic society. In practice, what it means is that white working people are just the last group being screwed over by the people who've been screwing over all of the others.
And it works, and it's like we're going to see like almost a reset where we're going to have to rebuild all these government institutions because they have so much value, And now let's talk about populism. You've mentioned it. It described what populism is. Now, one of the things that I want to drill home is that this is not just a far right thing. This happens on the left. Bernie Sanders, AOC, they're populists. Mm-hmm. So explain to the audience what populism is, so that we can come.
Yeah, I mean, in the most simple sense, it's giving the people what they want.
Yeah, or promising what they want.
Promising the
not
people.
Fulfilling that. Yeah.
Well, the fulfillment or otherwise is
yeah.
But promising the people what they want, and generally it's the same kind of platforms: cheaper housing, cheaper healthcare, cheaper education. With right-wing populism, there's also often getting X group out of the country because they're taking our jobs, like whatever X group happens to be in a particular time in history. For left-wing populism, there's a lot of tax the rich. And so what it is really a form of politics that is minimally mediated through institutions, and is really looking to some kind of fundamental reform of the hierarchies that exist in the society, or at least the promise of that reform. And then we come to two different kinds of populism, left and right wing. So right-wing populism will tend to not be an organic movement, because it's very often actually ginned up by the Koch brothers of this world to take people's anger at being screwed over by billionaires and point it in a direction that is helpful to the billionaires. Left-wing populism tends to be more organic, but as a result of that, it also tends to be more fragmented and just much more difficult to organize around.
And shot down by the corporate elites.
And indeed in opposition to those corporate elites.
Right. And I mean, it's you watch the Democratic Party prop up Bernie Sanders until it's time for him to win as a candidate. And they're like, wait a minute, even though he's technically independent. But yeah, and I wanted to say populism isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing, but I just wish that I wish we could find a bipartisan approach to the way that we vote, to the way that we look at it, so that we could actually make that what the people wanted. Whereas I know that when I mentioned about Oregon, I am a Democrat, or at least today I am. I'm losing faith in the Democratic Party nationally, and I don't really know what the heck to do about it, because I'm not just going to let them not do anything and then continue to support it. That's insanity. But where was I going with this? I just really think it's important to have a bipartisan approach, because we're all going to live here. So in Salem, I know that the Republicans, they feel underrepresented, they feel unheard. So yeah, sometimes they have crazy, stupid ideas, but when they do have decent ideas, we got to work with them. That's my opinion. There's this whole attitude that people have now about like, oh, they worked with this guy. No, I'm like, that's literally what the system is. It's we need the two parties. And
yeah, I mean, I agree with you up to a point. I think that there are definitely some things that that some Republicans believe in that are beyond
100% that are gonna exactly, and they feel that way about us. You know?
And yeah, that's the thing that makes it difficult. I think part of the issue is that when you have people on either side that dehumanize and invalidate the political participation of another person, regardless of what that person is doing, you say you don't deserve to be at this table. That's when things become very problematic. And one of the weird undercurrents the whole time that I was working in Salem is that I know that there are some legislators there because they're on record saying things about people that look like me.
Yeah.
And then you still have to sit down and do the day-to-day of getting your policy passed, working with those people, and it's weird and it's uncomfortable. But I think that there's definitely your own personal moral stance, but then also, if you're in a society trying to work to the betterment of that society, you have to sit down, you have to have unpleasant and difficult conversations.
Yeah.
And sometimes those conversations are going to end in a stalemate or somebody walking out. But if you don't sit down and try to have the conversation in the first place, then you've already
lost. Exactly. Now let's talk about the difference. I mean, populism is typically done in an approach to win elections. Nationalism is what's done by the actions once they get in power. Let's talk. I mean, I don't know, but I wanted to just talk about how populism isn't always a bad word. Sometimes there's good things that populists approach. Do you think that's true for nationalism? Is there ever a good thing about nationalism?
I think patriotism can be a good word, and I think stripping it back from the things that it has come to mean in this country. In terms of, you think of just the massive jacked up trucks with the flags. Right?
Sure.
But loving your country and wanting the best for it and working towards a common good are all inherently good characteristics.
Yeah.
Nationalism, I don't think, can ever be a good thing. And the reason I make the distinction is because love of one's country or the place that you're from, something that's as old as humanity. Nationalism is an ideology. And it came into being in the 19th century in response to the fact that we saw the Industrial Revolution completely overturn social structures. You had a lot of people coming to cities. The identity of those people, their political orientation, all of those things were up for grabs in a period of history. The old feudal way of doing things was dying away. You were no longer tied to a piece of land and then to your lord, and then that lord was tied to a bigger lord who was tied to a king. So creating a sense of belonging and togetherness was the aim of nationalism. But what it tended to do was to do that in opposition to, if you were English, in opposition to the French, for example. So there's an inherent, element of potential xenophobia in that. And then I think the other thing is it because so many traditional ways of living were lost during the Industrial Revolution, there's this harking back to a romantic past that never really existed.
Right.
And that is the most dangerous part of nationalism.
So we call that American exceptionalism, right? Where it's like people are like, we used to be this. And I'm like, no, we didn't. And I mean, the best example of that, because I'm fighting constantly by doing things about equity. I want people to have the same opportunities or similar opportunities. And one of the times that reminds me of that is I was cutting this guy's hair and he was like in his 60s, and there's a dude that was next to me getting his haircut that was an African-American man. A man in my chair, we were talking a little bit of politics, and he said, I just miss the way things were in the 1950s and 60s. He was so great. And then the black guy goes, for who? It's like they were hanging people like me from trees, man. And so it's all relative that there's a lot of people that get ignored.
Yeah, just to kind of expand on that point as well, I think one thing that's worth bearing in mind is when people talk about missing the way things were, obviously there's the racism. If you go back to the 60s, you're talking about Jim Crow still being in effect. But also, when you're talking about that idealized past from the point of view of a white guy in the 60s, he's thinking about a time when it was possible for a vacuum cleaner salesman to own a car and own a house and all of these other things that are no longer possible
Right.
on a single income. And the reason that was possible is because we used to tax the rich at 90% marginal.
Right. Yeah.
Like-
and under Eisenhower, under
Exactly.
a Republican governor, look into this, people, that the taxes was like 80% corporate taxes. So you had to reinvest in your business if you didn't want to pay taxes, which means that you grow the business. And a lot of times that meant paying pensions and paying employees to be valued. And I mean, look at the 1950s when America was great, because we were nowhere near that. When they say make America great again, what they're saying, right, when the MAGA movement is let's make Reagan's vision come to heart, which is the corporations will have all of the money and you will suffer to death. That's literally what it is.
I mean, I've been waiting 40 years. It hasn't trickled down yet.
Exactly. I saw this meme one time that said, what is trickle down economics? And the mom said, oh, that's easy. That's when the wealthy 1% gets all of the money and resources. And then the daughter, it's like a comic strip. The daughter says, and then what? And she goes, that's it. So, are you, okay, this is kind of a joke, lighthearted. You're not technically an elected official, but you do work in government. Are you on the Epstein files?
I'm not.
You're
I'm
not on it? Okay, I just wanted-
important enough.
I just wanted to get this. You've never been to the island.
Never been to the island.
What are your-
Never been on the plane.
What are your thoughts on this? I have purposely stayed a lot out of this. If you go back on my threads, you look at my episodes, I haven't talked a lot about Jeffrey Epstein because I feel like it's a distraction and it's a big boogeyman thing. Now, I'm going to be clear as day when I say this. If Donald Trump is on it, if Bill Clinton is on it, if all these people, and there's evidence that they have effect in pedophilia, I don't care what your political party is. You need to be gone. This has been proven with Andrew Cuomo that, and I'm totally fine with him running again. You know, Trump was reelected. That doesn't clear his name because he still has less than 50% of the support in this country, period. He's never been a democracy. He's never gotten a majority victory. So, yeah, I mean, do you care about this issue currently?
I mean, I very much care about this issue. And I think I care about it on two separate levels. One of which is the specifics of if somebody is having sex with underage.
And if it's this big of a ring, then yes, we need to do something.
that is absolutely horrific and wrong. But also because of what it tells us about the impunity with which our elites operate.
Yeah.
And so, you know, one thing I'll say is that this is not a surprise to me because in the United Kingdom, in about 2010, 2011, a bunch of stuff came out around a guy named Jimmy Savile, who was a serial abuser and who ran various like rings of other people who were abusers. And for a while, there was all of this talk around how there were these incredibly powerful pedophiles in positions of power throughout the UK. And they ended up prosecuting Savile, or like doing a Savile inquiry after he died. There were a couple of other, like there was a guy called Lord Janner, if I remember correctly. And then it all just went away.
Right. Well, and Prince Andrew. I mean, Prince Andrew's somehow connected to the Epstein stuff, and he's been prosecuted. Is that correct?
He hasn't been prosecuted, but I think he came to some kind of deal.
Okay.
Where I can't remember the precise details, but it was basically a sweetheart deal.
Sure.
But the indication was you wouldn't come to a deal like that if there wasn't any.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
So I think the idea that there are very powerful people doing horrible things and getting away with it is certainly not hard to believe for me, because I know there was some level of prosecution in the UK, and then all of that stuff just ran out of steam, presumably because it ran into more powerful forces that the investigation could overcome.
I think that this issue, the one thing that I will say is, I think it's I'm happy to see that there is a bipartisan approach to it, meaning that people are like, it's not political to want to save children.
Yeah.
And I do want to say that with a little bit of a caveat, that the hashtag Save the Children, which was literally created by QAnon, that the Republicans jumped on, you saw it on the back of people's windows and all this different stuff. It's if you tell me that you support Republicans or Democrats for that matter, and you believe that the other side doesn't care about children, then you can fuck right off. Because as a whole, not you, but as a whole, I think that's so vile. And another one, I'm gonna shout her out this, and she's not gonna love this. My stepmom told me one time that Bernie Sanders, did you know that he supports abortion after the 9th month? And I'm like, you mean after birth? How about you leave my house? When someone says something like that to you, it's an attack. It's an act of violence when they actually tell you that, well, you don't care about children. That is an act of violence to me, unless there's evidence to support that because of political leanings. And so this has been politicized, and I'm glad that at this point, I don't think that's political anymore. I think it's like we need to know the truth, and then Donald Trump is as guilty as anybody on this, other than Bill Richardson. I've heard that Bill Richardson's name was on the list like over 100 times on the flight logs or whatever.
And I think the key thing to bear in mind is that what it comes down to is, regardless of which party, at the top of the two parties, you're dealing with a social class. You're not dealing with a
100%.
Democrat or a Republican. You're dealing with people who have certain class interests.
Yeah.
And they protect those interests. One of the ways they protect those interests is making sure that the two parties are not rocking the boat for each other too much at that top level.
Yeah.
You know, we've all seen the picture, and it's a paparazzi picture of Chuck Schumer and Trump like joking around. There's a few of those.
I don't know. I will push back only because when John Boehner worked with Obama and they went golfing and they were trying to get stuff done, there's pictures taken and they made sure that he was removed from office, and that's a problem. Like I hear what you're saying and I agree, but I do think that it's not the end of the world for them to be sitting at dinner together.
I think it's not the end of the world for them to be sitting at dinner together. And, you know, as I said earlier in this podcast, like that's part of what you have to do.
Yeah.
But I think the key thing is when both sides vilify each other so much, then sit down to dinner, you need to look at the fact that a lot of that vilification is rhetoric. And it's a rhetoric that's done for the sake of political.
Well, I hate to say that there was a point, and this is really hard to explain, but there was a point where I was really trying to soften my stance on Trump when he got reelected. I'm like, he can't be Hitler in my mind, because if he is, then I'm just going to be paranoid for 4 years, which I've kind of came back to where I think he might be an authoritarian dictator, and it's terrible. But my point is that when Bill Maher went to meet with Trump and he talked about it, he's like, guys, he's a charming man. Like he is playing a politician when he says that he hates Democrats, even though it is literally dangerous because we see so much mass violence. So I reject it so full-heartedly when he says stuff like that. And I've started to tell my dad, you support a man that puts me in danger, because he says, I hate Democrats. Those exact words. As the sitting president, we have never heard a president say that publicly before Trump. I don't believe.
I mean, certainly not using that kind of tone. You know,
it leads
go back
to violence.
To like the sort of Red Scare.
Right.
But there's definitely using epithets that could lead to violence.
Right.
Is not a new thing.
No, but you know, the thing,
regularity with which he does it, the fact that he does it in a time in history where that stuff, you know, you don't hear it on the radio, it appears in your pocket.
Yeah.
And the immediacy of that communication, I think, has a massive impact.
Right.
As well.
I don't know. I wanted to see him not for being this evil person that I thought he was. And so I was trying to like soul search and watching like different perspectives, like and talking to my friends that are more conservative, maybe even people that don't like him, but are like, maybe they vote for him because it's closer to the policies that they want. Because I'm like, how? Like, you know, I mean, I just couldn't get it. And so for a moment, I was close. I was close to getting to that point. And then more things happened. And then, you know, you watch him just carry himself like if you actually watch an unedited clip for 20 minutes. And the guy is an absolute buffoon. And the people that he's surrounded with, like Stephen Miller is one of the most evil people to ever be in Washington, D.C. And he's the one that's the architect of all the immigration stuff. And it is meant to make them dehumanized. That is the actual goal. And I just can't get behind it. And so I will continue to say this until they put me in jail, that this administration is the closest that we've had to Nazi Germany. And we're going to see they're literally Alligator Alcatraz is a concentration camp. When the only reason that they're sending people to this new camp in Florida is because it's being looked at by the world. Like, you can't do this. You can't send people to El Salvador with just for the rest of their lives. And that's going to happen on our soil. So we have a concentration camp on our soil that is active. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know what people need to wake the hell up. Like, what are we supposed to do?
I think so. One thing I think is really important to bear in mind is a lot of this stuff is unusual because it's concentrated, if you'll forgive the pun. Like, it's happening all at once.
Sure.
But these are definitely things. These are things that have been happening. The deportations were happening under
Obama, under Biden. Yeah.
The idea of a concentration camp, we know that was done to the Japanese Americans during.
They weren't killed, correct?
They weren't killed, but and that's at least what's supposed to be happening at Alligator Alcatraz is just keeping people in prison. But the thing is, once you create that situation, the ability for an administrative blunder to lead to people dying to impunity. Somebody, prison guard decides to beat up an inmate, but there's nothing that can be done about it. So once you're creating these like gray sites, then what happens there is very poorly regulated. And I mean, when we're talking about ICE, they are now just like guys wearing bandanas with guns.
Yes,
they are unmarked. And here's the thing: is how do you know when somebody, like, regardless of the legality or the morality of them rolling up on you, how do you know when someone rolls up on you that they are actual ICE and not just someone who's just looking to
and it's funny because I've had this conversation with some of my more liberal friends, and I'm like, don't say that publicly. You're gonna tell people that they could pose as cops, like, and that, I mean, it's we have to be calling this stuff out. But no, absolutely. I mean, this is literally the creation of a private army, and we're watching it. And now ICE is after this big beautiful bill. I hate calling it that. Trump is such a brilliant marketer, though. Like, I mean, the next time the Democrats have a big bill, we should call it, this shit's awesome. So with the passing of the big beautiful bill, I'm not exactly sure. It is in law now, correct? It's the most funded organization outside of the military. It is ICE. It's the biggest government institution. It is so disgusting. And then, I mean, the thing is if ICE is effective in what they're doing, which they're getting people deported for sure, then what happens when there's not anybody to deport? Are they going to get rid of that organization? Or are they going to start targeting the citizens?
So I think you will have read, and your viewers will have seen the poem, First They Came For.
Yes.
Critical thing to bear in mind is that was not some kind of rhetorical tool. That was literally the experience of the guy that wrote the poem. He was a conservative Protestant preacher, and he watched as they took out the socialists and the trade unionists and the Jews and the gypsies, whatever else. And then they came for him, and that was it.
I'm glad that you say he's a conservative Christian, whatever, because to the Christians listening, which there's 6, I just want you to know that your religion has been hijacked by a billionaire, disgusting pedophile. Like, this Christianity is not what Trump represents, and I don't care. I'll say that till I'm blue in the face. So to the people listening, I don't know why you're not mad that Trump has stolen your religion. Like, when we talk to conservatives, like my dad is like, I voted for Trump because I'm a Christian. And I'm like, Dad, he is playing you like a fiddle, because he now doesn't have to be concerned with anything that you want. He said, I support Christianity, which of course I do too. I support the freedom of religion. So at that point, that's where you have that weird conversation with the people like, don't you support freedom of religion? Like, well, this is a Christian state. I'm like, oh, so you're a fucking Nazi.
I mean, religion is something that is often used because people don't think about it too hard. They don't think about it critically in the same way that they might think about their politics. So if you can get religion into politics, then it's relatively a lot easier to get people to sign off on stuff that they wouldn't sign off on normally.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And then you can get these big chunks of voters where you're like, okay, as long as we do this. And a lot of the stuff that he promised, he has done. Like, I mean, one of the things in his first administration, and this is why I was so mad at the liberals that are like, I can't vote for Biden because he supports Israel. I'm like, well, American interests support Israel. I hate to say that, but that's traditional in history. And he moved the embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, which is like literally part of the belief system for like end of days Christians, that they believe that it has to be moved, that the embassy gets moved or whatever. And then like, isn't it the destruction of Israel? It's like what's necessary.
I mean, yes,
for Jesus to come back.
There's a lot of very weird like end of time stuff.
Yeah.
One thing I do have to say, that kind of push back on, is like if I was a voter in this country, I couldn't have voted for Biden.
I like that.
And that is like acknowledging the fact that Trump is just as bad.
Sure.
But I think for folks who were very, very troubled 2 years ago with what was happening in Gaza, and now we're looking at a situation where like even Hillary Clinton is coming out and saying this is a starvation project. The fact is, there only one of those two parties was a party that they had any power over. So the Republicans were always going to go off and do whatever they did. With the Democrats, there was at least the possibility that by demonstrating that there are certain red lines for voters, that the Democrats would change their ways. And there's, that lesson doesn't seem to have sunk in yet, but there are also, there are folks like Zoran Mamdani in New York, where it's pretty clear that they've broken with the Democratic establishment, and they're putting forward an alternate articulation of what it means to be a Democrat. Going to one of the questions that you posed to me when we were setting all of this up, like, do Democrats have a chance? And I think that depends a lot on what they choose to do and the direction that they choose. They choose to learn the lessons from the defeat of Kamala Harris, which is basically you can't run an election on joy. That was their big thing, right?
It worked with Obama, but it was different because
Obama was pre financial crash and to an extent
Sure.
post it. We just don't have the level of wealth to be able to engage in rhetoric instead of.
I would argue though that I think that Kamala Harris ran a good campaign. I actually do. It's not the issue. I would argue that the issue isn't joy. The issue was that the voters didn't get a choice. And there's a lot of reasons. So they're both issues. That it didn't work for some people, the joy campaign, but I think it comes down to more about how in the primary that there was Dean Phillips and there was Marianne Williamson, which there's only 3 people, but they didn't do any debates.
Yeah.
And then they didn't give them a chance to actually be a candidate. And then so there was no actual. This is yet another example of the Democratic National Committee. I want to be clear, the National Democrats, and we see it in Eugene. I love Karen Knudsen, the new mayor, but she was endorsed before we knew who she was. So they're like, I'm not seeking re-election. This is the person I'm endorsing, which puts the thumb on the scale, and that's legal under political rules. But with Biden, he waited till past the point of them allowing them to be able to do something about it, so that he could handpick his replacement. And the voters hated it. They hated that. They're like, what about us? Why don't we get to choose? So we get to choose a corporate Democrat, and that's it. Those are the only options on the federal level.
I think the thing that's worth bearing in mind as well is that Biden's internal polling was showing that he had no realistic pathway to winning that election.
Right.
So there's a phenomenon of companies will often put in a black CEO if they know that they're gonna have a bad time on the stock.
Is that like the Black Pope? Because I heard that if there's a Black Pope, the world will end.
I don't think it's like the Black Pope. We've also had Black Popes. So
really?
Apparently the world ended and nobody noticed.
Yeah, well, that's 2012. That's true. That was in 2012.
But yeah, there's a phenomenon where when companies are on the ropes, they will hire a black CEO, and that black CEO ends up taking the fall for something that was predestined before they were ever hired because the company was already in trouble.
So when a black person
hard to not see the same thing happening with Kamala, because we know that the internal polling 18 months beforehand and 7 or 8 months beforehand showed that before Biden decided to step away, showed that he had no pathway to victory.
Right.
And then you put in somebody who is A, anointed, and then B, is starting from from a pretty difficult position, and that person happens to be black. It's kind of the same. You see the same pattern playing itself out there.
I do think that its time has passed. Now we can reflect. Tim Walz was a terrible choice. As much I love him, I think he's a great dude. But as far as getting any more votes, it did nothing. And you just talked about how you couldn't vote for Biden. Josh Shapiro would have been massive, because Josh Shapiro could have had a voice of how the Jewish community is looking at Israel. And I hope, I don't know, but whatever, we can sit here and
we can sort of sit here and rehash
Monday morning quarterback,
stuff, but I think with Waltz, he came out originally swinging quite a bit.
It was good, but it faded
to the left, but then it was deliberately toned down.
And he just didn't react. They didn't react.
And I think that's the thing. One of the things that keeps coming up is who's the Joe Rogan of the left? Obviously I'm sitting. Joe Rogan of the left right here. You just need to take some DMT and you'll be good.
I've been doing it. I've been doing a little. Yeah.
But also, who are the candidates? And one of the things you'll see a lot is some version of, if only we could find someone who was as charismatic as Zoran Mamdani, had the grassroots support that Zoran Mamdani does, that could pull in the votes and the enthusiasm, but whose politics were that of Nancy Pelosi.
Sure. What do you think about Gavin Newsom, honestly?
At this stage, it's kind of hot. He strikes me as just another one of those establishment Democrats. And I think that the lesson from Bernie is there is absolutely the basis there for slightly left on a global perspective, slightly left of center social democracy. in this country, and that there is a pathway to electoral victory for that platform. But that platform has been resolutely and repeatedly rejected by the Democratic Party.
Every time. And then, it's like the whole Trump is anti-democracy argument's losing its steam in an election because of the fact that the Democratic Party is not allowing democracy to happen, and so I don't know. I'm worried. Do you think that there's going to be a swing in the midterms? Do you think that, when is that? Is it next year?
Yeah, I think with the midterms, it's really hard to tell because traditionally it's like, you're supposed to always have the pendulum swing the other way. I think we're out of the pendulum swing universe. I think a lot of those truisms about what politics is are no longer the case.
Well, Trump is going to make a lot of people tune out because they can't pay attention. Yeah. It's like I said earlier, it's by design. Flood the system. Mm-hmm. It's Steve Bannon. It's like, we're going to flood the system. So much is going to happen that people will turn heads.
And I think you'll see some switch to the Democrats just from people who, especially people who are older and like just always vote.
Yeah.
I think that the Democrats ultimately need to offer realistic and concrete policy alternatives.
Yeah.
So a lot of what they ran on last time around, apart from joy, was around decorum in public life, right?
Yeah.
And I think that was actually a successful argument in 2020, but then
just not for Kamala Harris.
Yeah. But I think 4 years later, people's material conditions have deteriorated. The cost of living has increased. People just feel more precarious.
Yeah.
And so, running to try and win over the votes of the mythical Cheney Republican is going to be an uphill struggle.
Yeah, it's so funny that the Cheney Republican is the sensible one. Like that's what world do we live in? Liz Cheney.
I ask myself that constantly.
So I'm putting you on the spot, so you may not be able to pop it. What is a really valuable resource for people that are kind of like wanting to understand what's happening at the state and the national level? Is there a good resource that you like to read, or is there a place you like to go to kind of get information?
I mean, I try to diversify my
a lot of people say that.
Like, I don't trust any one source. So, I'll pick up what I pick up on social media and kind of, take that for what it is, right? And then, which is people's unfiltered thoughts. But then really you have to think about like what your basic political principles are. Do you believe in a society that is deregulated as much as possible and that good will spontaneously occur if people are left to their own devices? Do you think that we need state planning and intervention in order to make sure that the surpluses of a society are shared out more equitably? These are the kind of questions at the most fundamental level you need to ask yourself and then filter things through that. And then I think the final part of it is anyone who is trying to tell you that whoever you're engaging with is not human. Like, look at those people with a certain level of skepticism.
What I've learned works is talking to people that are opposition party. Why don't you give me the dignity that I can think for myself? I'm trying to give you that. Is what I say, like if it's with a friend, because otherwise, why am I talking to them? But like, I'm not gonna argue with someone local. But like, I have a couple friends, and this guy that comes in my shop, and I told him this time, I'm like, next time you come in, we cannot talk politics, because my coworker was like, this guy was yelling at me about, and normally I just squash it, but he's like, what? He asked me about ICE. What do you think about ICE? And I said, I think it should be illegal for someone to arrest somebody with a mask on. And he said, what about the people at the protests that wear masks? I'm like, what the fuck does that have to do with anything?
Yeah, they're not arresting.
They don't have law. You can arrest them if they're doing something criminal. Like you were talking about with these concentration camps. We have those protesters can't go arrest the cop for wearing a mask. So that's not the same. Just stop.
I think one of the things that's definitely changed in America in the time that I've been here is the delineation, or people's perception of the delineation between state power and individual power. So it's this thing of like, that argument that you just heard presupposes that like ICE is just some dude on the street.
Yeah.
And that somehow a government institution or an employee acting in their official capacity has freedoms.
Right.
When the First Amendment literally exists to protect your freedoms,
not theirs,
from the government.
Yes. And so and it's funny how, I was watching a clip with Charlie Kirk, and he said, we need to trust the government right now. I'm like, what? Like, you don't get to just say that. Like, when it changes hands, like, all of a sudden it's different. Like,
Yeah.
like but like, this guy was screaming at me about it, and I'm like, bro, you asked me a question. Why do I not get to have an opinion? I mean, we could argue of all you want, but the reality is, you have an opinion. Why don't I get one? Does it have to be the same as yours? That sounds like fascism, which I hate. And so he was like, oh, okay, that's a good point. I'm like, dude, like, freedom means freedom. It doesn't mean that I have to agree with you.
Yeah.
You know, and so it just is funny, and life goes on. But well, Kaz Zaidi, thank you so much. You made a special trip because you're living in Salem now, and I appreciate it. I know you still have business in Eugene sometimes, but it's an honor to have you in the studio.
It's been great to be here. I think we covered about half of what we were intending to.
It's tough, but we'll have you again. I like to keep these episodes about an hour, just because it kind of people's attention spans are way less than that. If you're listening and you'd like to support the show by a simple donation, you can go to strpod.com, and you can make a donation through PayPal, Patreon, or Venmo. Patreon is the best one. There's different tiers, whatever you can afford to donate every month, because I really need some help to be able to get the word out about these episodes. And yeah, I'll be doing a bunch of stuff coming up. This is a really interesting one. I'm going to be interviewing a friend of mine, Kayla, and her brother, unfortunately, was killed in a situation where him and his friend were playing with a gun. They were messing around with it, and then nothing legally ever came from it. So we're going to kind of go hard on the Cottage Grove Police Department. So that'll be in the next couple of weeks. So look out for that one. Thank you so much, Kaz. Do you have anything you want to add?
No, just really glad to be here, and it's a pleasure seeing you again.
Yeah, it's good seeing you too. Thank you so much. I'm Patty Rose. This is the Spent the Rent Podcast.